Welcome back to this expanded edition of CNN Newsnight, bringing you the very latest on the crash of TWA Flight 800. I'm Kathleen Kennedy at the CNN Center in Atlanta.
And I'm Martin Savage at the crash site in East Moriches, New York, where tonight, in the blackness behind us, the answers to what happened to Flight 800 are out there. And investigators have begun the slow and very methodical task of trying to uncover them. Was it evil? Was it accident? They may think something, but they are not speaking openly about what they believe the cause was. Kathleen?
Well, the search for bodies and debris from TWA Flight 800 goes on through the night. In the light of day, 9 miles off the Long Island shore, the power of the explosion became clear across miles of the Atlantic Ocean. Luggage and fragments from the ill-fated 747 were pulled from the water, along with the bodies of at least 140 victims. Crew members of the Air National Guard's 100th Air Rescue Wing saw the plane go down.
What we saw as it was happening was sort of surreal. Watching an orange and red fireball spiraling down into the ocean, and then getting out there and, as Fritz had said, try to identify quickly with what light we had any survivors at all.
What made the whole scenario so surreal is that we did not hear anything. We just were watching it. And time kind of stood still for a moment.
Across the Atlantic, family and friends of about 40 French nationals aboard Flight 800 went to Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris searching for news about a flight which would never arrive.
You can see the body of somebody who is dead. It's easier to accept the death.
In Montoursville, Pennsylvania, a prayer vigil was held for 16 high school French club members and their chaperones who were all on Flight 800 bound for Paris for a class trip.
Tragically, it is not the survivors who can tell us or give us any inclination as to what may have happened to Flight 800. All of that is being hidden somewhere under the ocean floor in the form of the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. Trying to find them will be the task of the divers, but not just the divers. High-tech equipment is being brought to the scene to aid in that search. And CNN's Gene Meserve takes a look at what is being brought in and brought to bear on the crash site.
Navy divers and salvage experts in Norfolk have packed their gear and are on standby to go to the crash scene to help with recovery efforts.
Every time I'm involved with something that concerns families, it's just my human nature to put myself in their spot. And I know how concerned I would be if one of my loved ones was on the bottom or if they needed to be recovered.
Other divers and equipment are already on the scene or on their way. Shipped out of Maryland were 2 types of sonar to help with the recovery of the critical flight and data recorders. If the recorder's pinging devices activated on contact with the water, one type of sonar towed by a boat will give their general locations. Another handheld unit will zero in on them. And there is yet another type.
Side scan sonar, which will help map the underwater debris field, both to give a picture of how the debris settled after the crash, which may be useful in determining what happened, but also to help locate pieces of the plane that have settled in the water.
Also on the way to New York, a mini remote-operated vehicle which can shoot still photos and videotape underwater. The Navy found the flight recorders of a Boeing 757 that went down off the Dominican Republic in February, shortly after it got its gear in the water. But Navy officials caution that in many respects, this recovery effort will be more like the one that followed the Challenger disaster, because, like Challenger, this aircraft blew apart in the air rather than on impact. Meanwhile, military intelligence is trying to determine whether this was a terrorist act.
It's fair to say the intelligence community is constantly reviewing information in its files as it gets new information which might shed light on the old information.
The Pentagon says it is ready to do more, and it probably will once its diving and assessment team on the scene determines what additional personnel and equipment are needed. Gene Meserve, CNN, the Pentagon.
Kathleen, we want to point out, too, that, of course, for all of this, the divers and the high-tech equipment to go to work, weather has to cooperate, and right now the early forecast for tomorrow is not looking good, not necessarily ruling anything out. but the weather is deteriorating somewhat.
Marty, could you tell us how the operation has changed since nightfall?
Well, last night, obviously, there was a great deal of activity in the air and out on the water. There is no activity that we can ascertain out over the crash site tonight. They are not looking above from the air. The boats that are out there, and there are a number of them twinkling in the darkness behind us, are all sitting at anchor, and they are pretty much just sitting over the crash site. It would be unfair and even wrong to say that the search or recovery effort has been suspended tonight, but it is certainly much quieter than it has been. Everybody is waiting for daylight, and hopefully maybe some new light that it may shed on the investigation. Kathleen?
Okay, thanks a lot, Martin. The cause of the airline disaster off Long Island is yet to be determined. Some fear terrorism may have been involved. Next, CNN's Carl Rochelle will join us again to examine the issue of airport security in the wake of the TWA tragedy.
Presenting Armor All Vinyl Siding Wash. Just spray it on, wait 5 minutes, then rinse it off with a hose. And look, why, it's the greatest invention since vinyl siding. Armor All Vinyl Siding Wash.
Could we ask you a personal question? Is your breath fresh enough to kiss someone?
Well, I brush.
If you want to be sure you have kissably fresh breath, you want minty fresh Scope. Scope Fresh is kissably fresh, the best kind of fresh your breath can be.
Long ago, an inventor came up with the assembly line, allowing a few people to make a lot of something. It was the model for efficiency. At Chili's, we pride ourselves for our inefficiency, because we make each of the Big Mouth burgers by hand, grilled one at a time by a person. And when you taste for yourself how good they are, you'll appreciate all the time we've wasted. Chili's fresh grilled Big Mouth burgers, monuments of inefficiency.
Critics are calling Courage Under Fire a powerful American classic. 4 stars. One of the year's best pictures. Extraordinary. Emotional. Magnificent. The first true Oscar contender of the year.
I'm gonna find out the truth. I guarantee you that.
A masterpiece. Denzel Washington. Meg Ryan. Courage Under Fire. Rated R. Now playing only in theaters.
Problem started here in the bedroom. Typical, I'm told, but we never thought it could happen to us. We were so happy. Just a couple of dumb kids in love. But then it all started to fall apart. We tried everything to make it work. With the light on, the light off, slower, faster. Hey, we even tried motor oil.
There's nothing funny about a cheap fan. But a Hunter fan with its whisper-quiet motor and sturdy wobble-free design will never let you down.
You know, I still can't believe we're here so soon after your hip surgery.
Hey, I wouldn't let you down on our anniversary.
Are you overdoing it? How's the pain?
Oh, I feel great. Took some Tylenol. Extra strength.
I'm still surprised the doctor gave you Tylenol after surgery.
For post-surgical pain, Tylenol is recommended the most by doctors.
Oh, where did you learn that?
I think it came with my new hip.
Tylenol, the pain reliever hospitals use most.
Log on to CNN Interactive for the latest news, direct from the CNN newsroom. Rated #1 among all basic cable websites. With business from CNN FM, the new financial network from CNN. Sports scores and highlights from Nick and Fred. Fashion and interior design with Elsa. Entertainment news from Lauren and Jim. The whole world of CNN on the World Wide Web. We're here 24 hours a day at CNN.com.
TWA Flight 800 exploded over the Atlantic at the peak of the summer travel season against a backdrop of tighter pre-Olympics airline security. CNN's Carl Rochelle again joins us now live from Washington for a look at security issues. Carl?
Kathleen, the cause of the tragedy of TWA Flight 800 is yet to be determined. Investigators say no scenario has been ruled out, including the possibility of terrorism. Well, whatever the cause, security concerns have become more acute at U.S. airports, and many passengers traveling the skies now share feelings of fear and resignation. Against this backdrop, President Clinton heads for Atlanta for today's opening ceremonies of the Olympic Games there, where security is already tight. We have 2 reports on airport security now, beginning with CNN's John Holloman.
We'll need your ID, please.
When you check in at an airport these days, you'll be asked to show a picture ID card and whether you were asked to carry something onto your flight. Those are some of the new airport security rules put in place by the FAA a year ago. But should the crash of TWA Flight 800 prove to be no accident, those tougher measures may not be considered tough enough.
If this event turns out to have been a terrorist event, then obviously we've got a problem. And one of the first things that we will have to do is figure out whether the problem was with the overall security system that's in place or whether somebody failed to implement existing security regulations.
The Department of Transportation keeps a list of international airports considered unsafe. Until May, Athens, Greece, the TWA plane's last stop before New York, was on that list. But security for international flights like TWA 800 already is tougher than it is within the U.S. For example, on international flights, passengers and their luggage are matched so that if you don't board the flight, your luggage will be removed from the cargo hold. There are more sophisticated devices available to screen luggage and people for explosives. But
the cost of implementing several of these measures will be in the billions of dollars. There's one estimate that it will cost roughly $1 billion to even get started to upgrade some of our current technology.
And would Americans put up with more security?
I am so much for them checking it that I'd be willing to travel without my luggage to get to my destination just so that I knew that everyone was safe.
In my opinion, terrorism can't stand, and so whatever it takes, you've got to put up with it.
It may mean you have to suffer a little more inconvenience at the airport. It may mean that you have to subject your baggage not just to electronic search, but physical search, maybe your person, to increase scrutiny. I think the American public will put up with that.
Federal officials say there are 4 levels of airport security that can be imposed. U.S. airports are at level 3 today, but a decision to go to level 4, the highest level, could come if officials decide terrorists were responsible for the downing of TWA Flight 800. John Holloman, CNN, Washington.
They're on horseback, in the air, on foot, looking for bombs and bad guys, trying to sniff out any trouble.
See?
Part of a highly visible security force, 25,000 strong, guarding the games here in Atlanta. And on the day after the TWA crash, one day before the Olympics, they say it's business as usual. There's no reason to change a security plan 6 years in the making.
Certainly, this is early on with this situation, and there's nothing to suggest that there is any kind of correlation between the crash and the Olympic Games at this point.
At Atlanta's airport, security was already tight, but they did add more people on patrol. Federal, state, and local law enforcement tell CNN they're at such a high state of readiness, they're only making minor changes daily, just tinkering. And that's the way it will stay unless the TWA crash is ever tied to terrorism. But, says this Air Force MP on loan to Atlanta, they could get tougher on the streets if they have to.
We could start checking people's passes thoroughly and, having weapons and making everybody feel uncomfortable. That's not really what the spirit of the game is about.
And Olympic visitors had the spirit. They certainly weren't worried about the TWA crash or terrorism.
I haven't felt skittish at all. Everybody's watching here, and the rest of the country is just not, I don't want to say unprotected, but not as carefully guarded as Atlanta. I feel safe here.
Officials say she has every reason to feel comfortable, that there's been no credible threat of terror against the Olympics. And they feel that with the largest peacetime security force in American history guarding the Games, they're ready for almost anything. But if TWA Flight 800 does turn out to be a victim of terror, they'll take another look to see how they can do even more. Art Harris, CNN, Atlanta.
And joining us again from Los Angeles to discuss security at the nation's airports, Mike Dornheim of Aviation Week magazine. Mr. Dornheim, I think the comment of the lady in that Art Harris piece that we just saw, that all this emphasis is on security at Atlanta, where it's not quite so tough at other airports because all the focus has been put in Atlanta. Is that a problem?
I should say first that I'm not much of an expert in the security field. I think that they've had these new measures in at the airports for, as I mentioned, over a year. They have been pushed more towards the Atlanta Games. I believe in New York they had some of these special bomb sniffing devices to check passengers or check something that might be suspicious and require a further look. Those were deployed for domestic flights that were involved with the Atlanta Games and not on the international flights. These are relatively expensive devices, so I think they were putting them where they felt they were most needed.
Now, I know your background is engineering and engineering an aircraft, and in that sense, if someone wanted to put a device on an aircraft, how big would it have to be? What kind of work would it have to do? Where would it have to be put to take an airplane out?
Probably not a very large device. There were some numbers that were floating around after the Pan Am crash at Lockerbie. I think something on the order of 5 pounds of high explosive was roughly in the ballpark of some of the things that were thought. And that's something that, you know, fits inside your personal computer or some device like that. I confess I'm not a real expert on where the best place would be to put it. When you're in an airplane, you're basically flying in it's a pressurized vessel so that you can breathe at the high altitudes. And there is a bit of a tendency, if you punch a hole in it, that hole will tend to spread. There's a lot of engineering that goes in it to make it not spread, but if you get a big enough hole, it can sort of begin to burst like a balloon. As far as getting them on board goes, these things typically require some sort of detonating device. That's the sort of thing that might show up on an X-ray. So often terrorists might try and hide the detonator in an electronic device like a boombox or a laptop computer. That's why those sorts of devices get some extra scrutiny when you go through the detectors.
Does the device have to be inside the airplane? Could it be put on the outside like a limpet mine, sort of magnetically attached to the aircraft by someone not even a passenger? Would that work?
That's an interesting idea. That would probably work reasonably well. You'd have to put it on with some pretty good glue because you're going at 400, 500 miles an hour, and it would tend to get ripped off. But that's also a possibility. That would require that you have access to the outside of the airplane and be able to get through all the ramp security. However, according to an earlier FAA report, the FAA themselves seem to be able to violate their own security fairly easily.
Let me ask you, calling on your engineering background, are you aware of or know of a situation or circumstance where an aircraft like the 747 could get this kind of cataclysmic destruction through some fault in manufacturing, fuselage, engines, fuel, whatever? Anything that would cause it to blow up like that?
Well, I think it is possible to conceive of something like that. Just as a for example, there was an accident quite a while ago in a 707 where basically the tail fell off the airplane, and without the tail to keep it flying straight, it just basically dove in.
But in a case like that, your crew was there, they were talking, they were doing things, they were even talking to the ground and saying we had a problem, right?
No, in this case, it was the voice recorder were continuous screams all the way in. If the tail falls off, it very violently pitches over and very quickly picks up speed, and it's not a calm sort of situation like...
but no explosion?
Well...
Fire?
There could be, because if the airplane gains enough speed in its dive and goes through enough wild gyrations, which it will tend to do if the tail were to fall off, then the wing could break open from the G-forces.
Which all seems to say that everything is still out there as a possibility, right?
That's right. I think it's still pretty wide open. I think the investigators are very rapidly learning what's going on, and I would expect in the next day or two they might have some pretty good clues, mainly on whether this was a terrorist blast or whether it was some sort of accident. If it was an accident, then it may take a little bit more time to figure out what it was. That's why, for example, looking at the radar tapes may be interesting. If you see
Mike, thank you very much.
Okay,
we're about out of time now. Mike
Okay.
Dornheim of Aviation Week magazine, thank you very much for being with us. Kathleen.
All right. Mike, Carl, thanks to you both. On this eve of the Olympics, the plan was for the world to celebrate the spirit of the Games, but the week has taken a tragic turn. We'll have some thoughts from CNN's Bruce Morton just ahead.
Hemorrhoids. There, I said it. They're not just uncomfortable to get, they're even painful to talk about. But if people did talk about their hemorrhoid symptoms, you'd find out that they use Preparation H more than all other name brands combined. Preparation H is formulated to reduce swelling, and it helps relieve itching, irritation, even painful burning. Look, you don't have to talk to anyone about hemorrhoids. You just need to know what to do about them. More people trust doctor-recommended Preparation H.
For everybody out there gifted with a photographic memory, I present the new 272-page Texas Travel Guide. Exciting, huh? Hope you enjoyed reading it.
Of course, if you don't have a photographic memory, we'll send you a free copy. Just call 1-800-8888-TAX.
Now just because I wear mascara here doesn't mean I have to wear it here.
Revlon creates new Color Stay, lash color that won't smudge off. Color Stay lash color sets in seconds for all-day wear and won't clump, won't smudge off around your eyes.
Even when you do this, even when he does this.
Revlon Color Stay, lash color that won't smudge off.
Because a woman should always make her mark, but not around her eyes.
Revlon.
You say your painted wood's looking kind of dirty? Clean it with new Armor All Painted Wood Wash. Just spray it on, then rinse away the dirt and mold and mildew stains to make your paint look great again. New Armor All Painted Wood Wash.
The Information Superhighway. Nice of you to join us.
Cover your eyes, America. This is the mother lode of monster movies. I will fear no evil. And they run wild. Starting Tuesday, it's Monster Movie Massive, only on Turner Network Television.
The sorrow and shock of the TWA disaster are being felt on both sides of the Atlantic. Families, friends, and relatives in Paris are trying to come to terms with the unthinkable. The fact that some 40 French passengers, none of which will ever come home alive. French President Jacques Chirac expressed his sympathies. He said, "The terrible accident on the New York to Paris TWA flight makes me feel deeply shocked and dismayed. I have no doubt that it will be possible to clear up the circumstances of this catastrophe and find the reasons for an explosion that took the lives of so many passengers." For those touched personally by the tragedy of TWA Flight 800, it's hard to imagine the strength they'll need to deal with their sorrow. But the sadness reaches far beyond those who lost loved ones. CNN's Bruce Morton with some thoughts on how others are sharing the grief.
We were supposed to come together this week to celebrate youth and strength and speed. We were supposed, if we thought of sand and oceans, to think of kids and summer sweetness. Now that's all changed, and what has brought us together is a dark sea, one more unexplained and heavy loss. Especially heavy in Montoursville, Pennsylvania, where 16 kids and 5 sponsors were bound for France. Principal Don Chandler put his head in his hands. But loss and grief and fear for people everywhere.
I felt sorrow for the people, but it was a pain of fear, too.
I'm not flying for a long time. I think that they need to get a grip on this. That's what I think.
We remembered, how could we not remember, Oklahoma City.
In Oklahoma, sometimes a guy was sitting at one desk and another guy was sitting at another desk, and then he turned around a second later, one guy was gone and the other guy survived. There's no explanation. And to try to understand why somebody was on this particular flight at this certain time, you know, no one can understand things like that.
A Greek poet wrote, "Pain, which cannot forget, falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in the end, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." But we have no wisdom yet, only the pain, and the vision of a dark sea full of death and grief. Bruce Morton, CNN, Washington.
I'm Martin Savage out at the crash site in East Moriches. We should tell you that our expanded coverage of the crash of TWA Flight 800 will continue from here and from other points where the story is developing. Kathleen?
And we'll hear what it could mean for the airline, which seemed poised to soar above a history of financial problems. Please stay with us.
This is the place where you can speak out and your voice will be heard. This is CNN.